Adam from this Pixel, and welcome to my first official Painter's Hollow of 2026. I'm just going to share my thoughts and keep you company, essentially, while you do your own thing. Maybe you're a sci-fi artist and you do really cool cyberpunk Tron type of stuff. Maybe your style is a little bit more futuristic. Maybe it's very hardcore and intense, like Chainsaw Man, for instance, which I'd love to talk about a little bit more. I just finished watching that series and the movie with my son Lucas. We've been binging on animes lately. Or maybe it's something gentle and abstract and relaxing and aesthetic, like Being Puppy Cat, another series that I absolutely love. Maybe it's got a warm autumny vibe, like Over the Garden Wall. Maybe it's very monochromatic and high contrast and very melancholy and very sad, like Dark Souls art. There's a multitude of different styles out there. There's a multitude of different psychologies when it comes to being an artist. And there's many things that we can gravitate towards as we explore our own artistic tastes and try to discover our own artistic style. We could go in a million different directions. And I think it's that infinite choice we have in front of us that can be both inspiring and give us a sense of progression, and it can give us that feeling like art is going to fuel our desires and fuel our imaginations and keep us growing and fulfilled forever, for some of us. For others, that infinite choice can be incredibly crippling. Like Guillermo del Toro said in one of his interviews, one of his presentations, an unlimited budget for an artist, or in his case for a filmmaker, is a death sentence. It can be a death sentence. And something I've expressed on my channel before, very often when we have set assignments like learning anatomy or value and rendering or color or composition or visual storytelling or set design or professional lighting, any of these fundamentals that are super fun to learn, they complete their assignments without much trouble, and we have a lot to chew on when we meet. Other days, especially those days where that artist has the, quote, freedom to produce whatever they want, they very often come back at the end of the week a little bit overwhelmed and discouraged and frustrated. Maybe they attempted hours and hours of trying to pull something off, but they just didn't know what to do and they couldn't solidify their thoughts. And that very often becomes the topic of discussion. What was it about this week compared to other weeks where you felt you lost your footing? You felt you lost your sense of direction. Very often it's that very instruction. Do what you want. See what comes of it. Good luck. Have fun. See you next week. And they come back the next week, sighing, frustrated, angry. They put way too much time into it than they wished. Other people felt finally liberated to be able to do that thing they wanted to do all along. Sometimes this is a result of experience. Sometimes you just don't know what your niche is yet. You don't know how necessarily to plan your own work and set projects for yourself. In other cases, it's just because you were far better at adapting yourself to the needs of others, for instance, for a studio or director, but you might not necessarily have practice investing in yourself and your own creative endeavors, your own projects. Personally, I feel like everybody has their place, and everybody has that career type that best suits them. I personally feel like artists owe it to themselves, if they have the nerve to do it, to start their own project, to build their own project, be it something like Sunderfall, like Tyler Edlin did, for instance, or my daughter, Emily, who's been working on a comic book, who's hundreds of pages in, or well over 100 and something pages into this comic book. She's been working on for a really, really long time, called Night Bus. You can follow her on Instagram. Yes, that's a plug. Go for it. Beautiful, beautiful work. Some people just need to have a wrapping. They need to have a home for their imagination. If it's just them and their drawing and no idea of where to go or what to do, then the very act of just getting yourself started every morning can be very overwhelming for a lot of people. I would say I'm somewhere in the middle, personally. I don't necessarily need to have a project, but I do need to have a theme. I do need to have a niche, in my case. Dark fantasy illustrations, creature designs, character designs, stuff like that. Stuff that tends to lean a little bit more towards the maximalist, organic, creature, dark, horror style of work. I just need that theme. And I think that's enough of a foundation for me to be able to gain momentum when I start a new piece, like the one you're looking at right now. At first, when I first started getting into this kind of work, I found it was a bit of a gamble. It was a bit of a hit and miss, depending on the situation. Sometimes I can jump right into something and feel like I'm in the flow. Sometimes I feel like I need to attempt 3, 4, 5 times before I gain momentum on something and feel confidence. But I feel over the years, with the experience I've got, that's not so much of an issue for me. I can generally jump into something pretty fast, and I can figure it out quickly enough how to create a foundation in a drawing in a way that gives me confidence very early on, in the first 5-10 minutes, to know whether or not I'm going in the right direction, and then I can take it from there. And once my wheels are pedaling and once I've got my balance, then I'm good. I'm in the flow, and I can generally continue that piece until I'm finished. I can experiment, I can try different things, as you'll probably see me doing here, but I feel I found that flow. For some people, however, for you perhaps, you need more. You need a project. You need to build something. You need to build a world around your design. You need to build an artistic philosophy. I'd say for most of us, I think that's probably a good way to go about it. And if you find yourself discouraged, if you find yourself constantly sitting in front of your computer or your sketchbook or your easel, and you're staring at that blank canvas, and you get artist's block, chances are it's because there's just too much friction between your mind and your art, that you're expecting too much of yourself to be able to pull a rabbit out of your hat and produce some magical work of art from nothing. There are too many possibilities, there are too many different styles, there are too many directions you can go, and I feel that for most artists, not having a sense of direction, not having a niche, not having a style, not having a theme, not having a project, usually doesn't go very far. And if you're the type of artist in that same thought, if you're the type of artist who feels like you get bored easily, you like to change gears every now and then, you're the type of person who likes to work in studios where you change projects every 6 months, keeps things fresh, keeps things fun, gives you that sense of novelty and excitement and growth, but you're not working and you don't have a director giving you that sense of direction, then what I recommend you do is create short-term projects. Create projects that are maybe 12 pieces long. Think of it like an anime series. Anime very often it's not 16 seasons. It's just maybe 12 episodes, 25 episodes. Maybe they follow it up with a movie. But it's enough for you to really get invested in the project and get invested in the characters, get invested in the story and enjoy yourself. You can get that lovely feeling of a beginning, a middle, and an end to the story. But it doesn't go on forever, right? It's a short but sweet single season series that just kind of allows you to dig into a subject well enough. And then once that's done, once you feel you have a little bit of closure and you've explored it to the best of your ability, you move on to the next thing. Maybe the next thing is something significantly different from what you already did. Maybe at least in terms of theme. Maybe one was more futuristic and sci-fi. And maybe this one you want to go a little bit more dark traditional fantasy. Or maybe you want to go a little bit more of a comic booky style, graphic novel type of style of art. And then the next one you go a little bit more traditional cartoony. Cool. I ain't gonna judge your journey, baby. You do you, right? If you're not sure, if you're listening to me right now and you're painting or you're drawing and you're not totally confident about what's been coming out of you lately, or you feel like you very often fall into the trap of kind of going through dry spells, which I'm all too familiar with. We all are. We've all been through that more than once. Then I recommend experimenting. You got to give something a chance. Try out just doing a 5-piece series based off of a certain theme. Try writing a little short story about what you want your artwork to be about. Maybe you need to thumbnail or storyboard a little bit to kind of get a sense of structure to your work. Maybe you need to work with certain types of shape designs. Maybe you're more of a graphic artist who needs to maybe do a whole series of character or creature designs based off of a certain type of shape, like triangles or rectangles or squares or circles. Experiment with different things. The only way you can find out for sure is by doing it. And I think that segues nicely into a thought that I've had quite a bit, that led to a conversation that I found myself getting very passionate about. I was talking with my son, Lucas, who's 12, and my daughter, Chloe, who's 16, and my partner, Geneviève, who's my age. And we were sitting down at the kitchen table talking about school, and my son, Lucas, was complaining about the fact that history was very difficult and very boring for him, and I immediately related to that. I hated history class. To me, it was just random dates and names that meant absolutely nothing to me. And to add insult to injury, my history teacher in high school, as sweet as she was as a person, was a very boring history teacher. And it was very clear she didn't particularly care for the subject she was teaching. I don't even know if she had a background in history herself. But she was this little short lady, adorable, cute as a button. But she was so short that when she would sit the history textbook on her desk, she would prop it up on its side and just place herself behind it so you couldn't actually see her head. There was just this big book with these two little cute woman hands holding onto the sides of it while she just read out of the book. And she was so unaware of what was happening in the rest of the class that half of the class could tune out and start having conversations with each other, and it wouldn't even stop her. She didn't care. And all I remember was that kind of like, if you ever watched Charlie Brown, the teacher, the womp, 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 womp. That's pretty much what it was for me. A lot of subjects in high school were like that for me. It was just a lot of womp, womp, womp coming from teachers. And it was just random dates and random names and random dates and random names that had absolutely no meaning to it whatsoever. As such, I unsurprisingly failed history, high school history, 2 years in a row. Nothing, I couldn't retain anything. Nothing stuck at all. It just didn't stick in there. I couldn't even, you couldn't pay me to pay attention to that class. It was just so meaningless to me. And that was a problem because I was approaching Sec 5. I was going to be I was graduating, and I needed to pass high school history to get my high school diploma if I wanted to move on to college and do something I actually cared for. So I had no choice but to hire a tutor. And I hired one of my friends, Rebecca, who was really good in history, and I asked her if she could tutor me in for 2.5, 3 weeks at most, maybe 4 weeks. We sat down for a couple of hours at the kitchen table, and she tutored me in history. And after about 3 to 4 weeks, I guess, of tutoring, I passed history with a 75, which to me was the equivalent of getting an A+, because I would have been perfectly happy with a 60, with a barely pass, with a D-. I would have been happy with that. But no, I actually got a decent mark. What did she do? What did she do that was different? What did she do that made a difference for me, that actually helped me retain that information and retain it for long enough to be able to enter an examination room and do the test and pass the test? Well, for starters, she gave me structure to the course. She gave me the story. Because remember, history has the word story in it. It's the story of our world, of the history of humanity, of our world, of politics, etc. And once I understood the story and I knew the people, and she gave me a sense of their personalities and their contributions and how people felt during these times and how people responded to the state of politics at the time, when it mattered, when it was personal, when it was an emotional thing, when it impacted their grocery bill and it impacted their careers and their livelihood, just like what's happening right now in the world. I bet if you're not somebody who's good at history, you might not remember what happened in 1867. You might not remember what happened in 1794, but I bet you remember what happened in 2025 a lot better, because you know the players, you know the game, you know the personalities, you know the political divides, you know the tensions, you know how these things are affecting people, you know the fear, you know the confidence or lack thereof that you feel from all of these different events, don't you? She gave it structure. She gave it context. She made me feel the moment. She brought me back in time as if I was watching a documentary. And because she made it personal, because I could relate to these stories on a personal level, I just had to connect a name and a date to that. But the story was there. The structure was there. I could visualize it in my head. I think that was the first big lesson on how to retain things that you feel might be hard to otherwise. If your brain's not good at dates and names, if you're not a numbers person, then of course something like history, if taught through the lens of names and dates, won't do anything. But from the perspective of an emotional storyteller, you'll never forget it. I think that was the first thing. The other thing that I ended up getting quite passionate about when I started talking about it was from the perspective of a teacher. And asking my son, what classes do you tend to enjoy the most? He said, well, music, because he's in the music course like his older sister was. And he said, I tend to really enjoy music class a lot more, and he plays the trombone. And I said, well, what's different about it? He goes, I don't know. I just enjoy it more. I don't necessarily get to talk much or engage much on a personal level, but I do feel connected to what's going on. And why is that? What was it about that made him and most other students who are in a music class or a class like that, what makes them pay attention? What makes them not fall asleep in that overheated, dry, uncomfortable, claustrophobic, white prison cell of a classroom? What is it? What makes the difference? Well, the first, I think, most important thing, and I'm sure that many of us artists can relate to this feeling, is the difference between that history class and music class is that you actually have the instrument in your hands. You're actually physically connecting with your learning process. There's a reason why artists love to draw, because in order to learn, you have to have a pen or a paintbrush or a pencil in your hand, don't you? You don't learn and get good at art by just reading about it. In fact, I can say unapologetically that despite the fact that I studied fine arts and I've taken art history classes, I can't remember half of the shit I learned in art history class. Not at all. I don't care either. The only history that I care about is the history of artists that means something to me. Artists whose lives and whose art style and whose artistic journeys and whose artistic philosophy click with my own. There's a reason why I've watched every movie and documentary and home movie of Zdzisław Beksiński. He means something to me. He means something to me historically. He means something to me on a human level. He's funny as hell. He's very quirky. He's got an amazing imagination. I love hearing him talk. He's got an amazing sense of humor, or he did at least because he passed away. He had very strange habits, like he just videotaped everything, even funerals. He had this impulse, he had this compulsion to videotape everything. And he had that absolutely wonderful, dry Polish wit that I grew up listening to my whole life. Just words and expressions that just so fucking funny. So funny. Oh my God. Hilarious. Artistically, I loved hearing him say things in interviews like, what does your painting mean? Is this a painting about the Holocaust, about communist Poland and the military and poverty and this and that? And he goes, no. And he'd look at the interviewer with a bit of a, why are you asking me that stupid question? He goes, well, what does it mean? What does that mean? What does this symbolize? Why did you use that image? I don't know, because it felt right to me at the time. I don't really give my art that much thought. Well, then what do you call that? He says, I call it art. Art speaks for itself. You know, I hear artists like that, and then I reflect on what I produce. And it's little things like that click for me, that make me go, yeah, stop trying to define everything. Stop trying to make things identifiable on a superficial level. That art can be a way to tap into images and shapes and textures and values and colors and compositions and shapes that just make you feel something. And if you question yourself too much on where you're going with it, if you question your impulses, then that can kill your spontaneous mind. And if you do that, if you pull yourself out of the spontaneous mind, then your ability to create can really take a back seat. I'll give you an example of something that I learned through my own discoveries and from studying the artists that I love, like Beksiński, for instance, and Dark Souls, something I might have spoken about in the past, something I share with my students very regularly, especially being a creature designer. And I've heard other creature designers share the same thing, like Anthony Jones, for instance, who I very much relate to artistically. I always noticed that in Souls games, almost everything, minus a few minor exceptions, hide their face or don't have a face. And if they do have a face, it's very nondescript. I can honestly say there are no real human characters in Souls games, in the sense that this one doesn't have blue eyes, and that one doesn't have this one doesn't have this type of hair that means that, and this type of an expression. There's these ghostly representations of characters, the firekeeper and the old crone and the blacksmith. The blacksmith is probably the most humanized character in the entire series. But even your character, when you're playing Dark Souls, your face is negligible. It's unimportant. And after you die a few times, you hollow out, you turn into a husk anyways. So there's no real soul in that face. And as such, I realized that when I was over-focusing on faces, which is something I did all the time and studied all the time because I was a cartoonist, and the study of the face was something I did religiously, at a certain point, I realized that that's what's holding me back if I want to be a real creature designer. I needed to let go of the face. I need to hide the face. And the minute I would put two eyes and eyebrows and a nose and a mouth in there that were distinct and expressive, my drawing fell apart in most cases. It really did. And the minute I hid the face, obscured the face, abstracted the face, removed the face, all of a sudden, all of that creative energy that the face hijacked in my mind would seep out into the rest of the form. And it was at that point in my artistic journey that I had that epiphany that I could literally create anything. The moment I tried to slap a face on something, it became a character. And the moment it became a character, it had to adhere itself to the rules of proportion and the rules of humanity and the rules of realism. And as soon as I could pull myself away from that, then I could literally express anything through anything. It was a real epiphany for me that I've never healed from, so to speak. And I think it was a very instrumental move in my life. It unlocked my dependency on justifying every artistic decision that I made. A good example of this would be drawing fantasy armor, or fantasy art in general, but think of fantasy armor, for instance. One of the things that always used to hold me back from drawing armor or weapons or things like that was I had this little voice in my head. That voice probably belonged to John Howe of Lord of the Rings fame, who was exceptionally well versed in armor and LARPing, live action role playing and weaponry, and having a smaller frame very often said that because I had a smaller frame, I could fit into a lot of these armors. So especially when he was working on Lord of the Rings, his armor needed to be functional. It needed to be able to translate onto a human form. It wasn't just fantasy that was going to go on a CGI character. This had to be usable for soldiers in battle, for instance. He also knew certain things from LARPing, for instance, that you try wearing a sword on your hip and walking through a door. It's not as easy to think. You try to walk around a tight kitchen with chairs and counters with a sword on, it's very difficult to get around because you're knocking into everything. You take up a lot of space. And I thought I needed to respect those same rules. But then one day, I walked into, it was the day actually that I bought my Cintiq 27 QHD. So we're going back a decade. Well, just look up my Cintiq 27 QHD review. You'll find out roughly how long ago this was. Chloe's in that. Little young Chloe's in that video. She's very adorable. Or as I like to say, she was a doorbell in that video. And when I was waiting to get for my Cintiq to come through, because I had to process the order and stuff like that. It was at a photography shop in Montreal East on St. Hubert Street. If you're ever interested. And I was waiting for my order to come through, and I decided to just wander around the street because there was a lot of little shops and stuff like that, a lot of cute little shops. And I'd gone across the street to a trading card store to check out some of their cards and some of their illustrations and stuff. And once I exited that trading card store, I stepped away and I looked over to my right and I looked into the window of the store just next to it, and I went, is that a suit of armor? What the hell's that? I was very surprised to see something that beautiful and that intricate on this little dinky St. Hubert Street. So I took a couple of steps over to the right, and I looked and I was like, yeah, this is some medieval store that have a big coat of handmade armor and weapons and crossbows and daggers, and what the hell is this place? And I looked up at the sign and it said Dracolite. And I went, that looks pretty dope. So I decided to walk in. And the store at the time was actually quite empty because it was during business hours, so most people must have been at work. And it's a semi-quiet, well, at least it was a semi-quiet section of town. It wasn't like downtown, for instance. And I walk in and it was pretty quiet, and I walk into this place and my jaw hits the ground. I was like, what the hell is this place? It's wall-to-wall swords and daggers and crossbows and axes and spears and maces and morning stars and medieval costumes and dresses and handmade jewelry. I was like, what the hell? What is this? This is so cool. You wouldn't, it was so unassuming on the outside. It would look like it would have been this tiny little shop. You walk in and it's just, holy shit. You can look it up online, by the way. Dracolite. Lite. Dracolite. And I walk in and there's some guy behind the counter. He says hi, and I'm looking around and I'm looking at all this armor and all this stuff. And as soon as you walk in the door, I noticed just to my left, at least at the time, there was this full-sized wearable suit of leather, black and red rogue armor with kind of like cool spiky bits and some like cool headdress on it and stuff. It looked really cool. You know, kind of spiky gloves, looked very dark and menacing. And I went, oh, that's pretty cool. And I kept walking around the store and looking at all the different stuff. And he was going to help you with something. I'm the only guy there at the time. And I said, yeah, actually, I have a question for you. I said, I'm a fantasy illustrator. I do a lot of fantasy art and stuff. And I couldn't help but notice by the front door, you have this suit of red leather fantasy rogue armor that looks really, really cool. And he goes, yeah, thanks. Next to a more realistic wearable set of plate armor. They had them side by side. And I said, how do you feel about that? And he said, what do you mean? I'm not sure I understand your question. I said, do you make this armor yourself? She goes, yeah. We have a workshop right upstairs where we do it all by hand. I can even come and show you if you want. I said, yeah, I'd love to. And I said, but how do you feel about fantasy armor that isn't practical? It's more aesthetic and cool looking. And I'm asking this to a seasoned armor crafter. And he said, I love it. I think it's super cool. He goes, I don't know why I crafted it. That's why I made it. So obviously I think it's cool. I said, the reason I'm asking is because from an illustrator's perspective, I'm always very sensitive to not pissing off professionals. I don't know if you listening to me right now can relate to this, but I always kind of had this fear in my head that if I designed a piece of armor that wasn't functional in a real life sense, that it was an indication that I lacked experience as an illustrator, that I should learn the function of armor and that the proportions and that the straps and that the sizes and the number of plates and the way the shape of the this and that it had to adhere itself to the laws of realism so that some real person could wear it. I said I always wanted to do that because I felt that I would be judged otherwise. That if it wasn't realistic, if it wasn't practical in a real battle sense of the word, that somebody might judge me for that and call me an amateur. And he said, okay, I think I understand what you mean. He says, no, I think he said, the reason why I made that and designed and made that rogue armor is because it's cool. And that's the only reason. I just thought it was cool. I don't care. I didn't care if it was practical. It's wearable, of course, because, this is usable armor. It's not just for display, although a lot of people purchase it for display. He said, but that's not why I bought it. That's not why I made it. I made it because I love to design. I made it because I love cool stuff. And I know that those little red leather spiky bits on it are totally pointless in a historical sense of the word, but it makes you feel like a badass, doesn't it, when you put it on? Or even when you just look at it, it just looks so badass. And I went, yeah, you're right. And it made me realize at that point, that was another piece of the puzzle in helping me discover my fantasy illustrator self. If an actual real life armor crafter can just indulge in coolness, then what's stopping me? And then it made me reflect on all the things that I grew up loving. Final Fantasy and Silent Hill and Dark Souls and all of these different things. Although I don't know if I was playing Dark Souls back in the time. I probably just had. But just kind of reflecting on all of these cool movies and animated films and video games that I just nerded out on. And I thought, yeah, if Cloud from Final Fantasy was a real person, he would have been a 12-year-old skinny little teenage boy with these little string bean arms, lifting a sword that probably weighed the same as a Buick. Like, that thing is massive, big hunk of steel. Like Conehead's sword in Silent Hill. This big, heavy-ass thing that he just drags on the ground. And Cloud isn't even muscular. He's just a skinny little kid with spiky blonde hair. And if you look at his outfit, there's absolutely nothing practical about it. But that's the point. It's fantasy. It's cool. So if you really think about it from a fan's perspective, if you think about it from a video gamer's perspective, why do we play video games? Why do we watch movies? It's because Cloud, to a lot of us, represents what we wish we could be. That in reality, we're a skinny little 12-year-old boy who hasn't filled out and doesn't have his man body yet, but he can wield a sword that weighs half a ton and swing it around like it's a piece of cardboard, like it weighs nothing, flawlessly, and add some cool special effects to that shit. And I can wear some cool clothes and have spiky hair that just maintains its shape no matter what I do. And it gave me that emotional permission to just be a nerd. And to come full circle with that realization. When it comes to art, and when it comes to artistic creation, and when it comes to that whole conversation I had with my family about history class, learning is a physical activity. And our creations are a physical activity. I'd say that one of the things I got very passionate and upset about was the fact that the problem with a lot of schools nowadays is that they expect kids, especially teenagers, to sit on their hands for 6 hours a day. Don't touch anything. Don't fidget with anything. Don't get distracted by anything. Just sit down, shut up, and listen to names and dates for 6 hours, 8 hours. You wonder why classes like music class or gym or art class are the ones that kids enjoy doing the most. It's the only ones where they can actually hold the remote control in their hand and play the damn game, isn't it? There's a reason why video games are so engaging, particularly the ones that just demand a lot of your hand-eye coordination. What is one of the things that keeps games like Dark Souls or Bloodborne or any of the Souls games so engaging If you think about it from a physical perspective, not forget about lore, forget about characters, forget about story, forget about mood, forget about maps, forget about all that shit. If you come down to the fundamental of what makes it so engaging and so memorable, is that if you're really playing a Souls game, you're almost never given permission to take your hands off the controller because you will die if you do it. You have to keep those hands locked in. You have to keep your reflexes at the ready all the time. You can seldom let your guard down. And even if you're in an area where it doesn't seem to be any NPCs that can do anything to you, in almost every case, even in something as huge as Elden Ring, if you put your remote down, eventually some NPC will make his way across the map, lock onto you, aggro, and kill you. And you'll come back to a corpse. Right? And when you're fighting, you can't just hit auto attack like you can in World of Warcraft. No, you have to be ready to dodge, ready to attack, and everything is a potential threat. You aren't too strong for anything. Anything can kill you, no matter how powerful you are, no matter how badass you look. It's a constantly physically engaging experience. Compare it to something like Red Dead Redemption, which is an acclaimed game, I don't doubt it. I couldn't get through 2 hours of it because I spent the whole first hour watching that effing cowboy walk through the damn snow, and I didn't even have to hold on to my I got to press forward on my D-pad at best. Or, some of the Metal Gear games where the bloody cinematics or the cutscenes would last 2 hours long. And me having to be a completionist needed to watch it all in the first thing. And by the end of that game, man, I was cursing at Kojima. You son of a bitch, you made me sit through that whole goddamn cutscene. God damn it. I didn't get to touch. I just sat down. I could have gone to the bathroom and come back an hour later. The goddamn cutscene would have still been going on. I didn't even get to touch my damn remote. Thankfully, moving forward, he learned to chill out a little bit. If Kojima, if you're listening to this, I absolutely love what you produce, and you're one of the greatest geniuses of all time. But for God's sakes, just make your movie and get it out of your system. Thankfully, in the latest Metal Gear, sadly probably the last original Metal Gear to be produced, unless Kojima gets the rights to it, was very engaging and very hands-on. And I really, really loved it. It was my favorite one. Take that back, harken that back to education. How do you expect anybody to pay attention for 6 hours while they're sitting on their hands? I think that's mental torture. I really do. And looking back at my struggles through high school, whether I have ADHD or not, probably do. But, even if I didn't, as an adult, I went back for a parent-teacher, just kind of like a meet the teacher type of thing at the beginning of the year, when Lucas had started high school, and we got to sit in the class that he was sitting in. And, a 49-year-old man sitting in this chair in this classroom. And I remember it all came back to me. I was sitting next to my partner, and I'm looking at her, and I kind of shook my head. I went, how the hell can anybody concentrate in this space? The air was stifling and dry. The windows were closed. The sound was very muffling and claustrophobic, like there was some strange noise-canceling effect in this space. The teacher was sweet, but the clothes she wore and her enthusiasm was so strangulating. Her smile looked so painful to me. The chairs were painfully uncomfortable. Everything echoed and resonated. So if you as much as tapped your foot on the ground, it echoed across the whole room. And there's no decoration, and everything was this yucky, basic white wall, painted stone bricks. Some writing on the wall and some crap up on the wall, some little posters, just so pathetic. And I thought to myself, I could barely stand 20 minutes in that room. I was like, I gotta get the fuck out of here. this is so claustrophobic to me. Oh, God. And I couldn't wait to get out of there. And I thought, Jesus, my ADHD son has to sit in here on his hands and listen to a teacher talk about something they don't give a crap about, and they're not allowed to touch anything, and he's not allowed to stem, and he's not allowed to move, and he's not allowed to talk, and he's not allowed to distract himself. My condolences. You know? So what do you do about that? I mean, give me 5 minutes with these assholes, with these school boards. You know? Give the kid a map to hold on to. You have to trace it on the map of where these adventurers went. Give everybody a map. You're not getting enough funding from the school? Fine. Print it out, buddy. It costs you 1 cent to print. I'm sure you can afford that. All these stupid, very depressingly illustrated textbooks you got with all these ugly ass colors with these stupid cartoons. Ugh. Vomit. So depressing. Give him a map. Give him, pull out some, go to the dollar store and get some little figurines like you would for a board game and have them trace it on a map and then write down a date next to that location where that thing happened and get some stickers and put something on that. Give them something physically to hold in their hands. Put the remote control in their hand and encourage them to press the buttons. But don't make them sit through 8-hour cutscenes and tell them that they have to put the remote control on the ground every day, 5 days a week for 7 years. That's torture. It's torture. And that's probably one of the major reasons why you're an artist in the first place. You learn with your hands. It reminds me of one of my favorite TED Talks by the late Ken Robinson, Sir Ken Robinson, who I've read all of his books, including the one that his daughter narrated after he had passed away, who's amazing. Katie Robinson, if I'm not mistaken. Amazing, every one of them. He's one of the best. He's one of my greatest role models as a teacher and as a human on the planet. Him and Simon Sinek are two people I utterly adore. I love them. Humanitarians and real people. Wonderful. And if you've ever seen his TED Talk, I think probably he's had a few TED Talks, but the first one he did was Do Schools Kill Creativity? And he tells the story about a young girl who was brought to see a therapist or a psychologist or some behavioral counselor or something like that to be helped because the parents felt she was always being a disruption in class and she couldn't sit still and blah, 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 blah. And the therapist or we'll say psychologist for what it's worth, and the psychologist is sitting down with the parents, and the parents have this concerned look on their face, and the little girl is sitting on her hands trying her best not to move. She's in her best behavior, and the parents express the fact that it's been a bit of a struggle with her and everything like that, and the therapist is listening to them. And then at a certain point he says, "Okay, all right, can you come with me?" He says. He motions to the parents. He says, "Can you come with me into the other room for a bit?" And they exit the room and go into the next room where there's a 2-sided mirror so they can see the daughter through the mirror, but she can't see them. But before he leaves, he goes over to his cassette player or whatever, and he puts on some music and he starts to play it. He just clicks on the music and then he walks out of the room. And sure enough, the moment they leave the room and they go into the other room, the girl immediately gets up and starts to dance. And dance and dance and dance. She can't sit still. And the parents apologetically look over at the doctor and say, "Oh, there you go. You see, she just can't sit still." And the doctor smirks and says, "Your daughter is not sick. Your daughter's a dancer." And they say, "What do you mean?" He said, "It means she needs to move to think. She needs to move. She thinks with her body. She thinks with her muscles. She thinks with her feet and her hips and her head and her neck and her arms. She thinks with her body." I said, "What should we do?" He said, "Well, I suggest you sign them up for a dance school." And he did. And she went to her class, and she came back at the end of the class, and the parents said, "How did it go?" And she goes, "It was incredible." And she goes, "What do you mean?" She goes, "It was a room full of people who couldn't sit down. They were all standing and sitting and moving. They were like me. They were just a room full of people like me. People who could not think on their ass. They had to think on their feet. They had to move to think. They had to move to engage." And she went on to be, I think, the woman who choreographed, I'm probably misquoting this, so I recommend going and watching the TED Talk. I think she was the woman who was the producer for Cats, if I'm not mistaken. And the point he was making in that video was, most people would just plug her up with medicine and tell her to sit down and shut up. But instead, she harnessed her compulsions. She used that personality type to become an artist, and an extremely successful one at that. I mean, how can you not become great at dance if you're the type of person who can't sit down or stay still when music plays? I mean, that in and of itself will guarantee a life of practice, will it not? And if you find yourself the type of person who doodled in class because you couldn't stand the claustrophobia of this stifling, hot, boring, depressing room, like I did, well, then my advice to you is pick up your pencil and draw. Pick up your paintbrush and paint. Pick up your stylus and design something. Now, of course, this is an art channel, and you are all most likely artists. So, thankfully to me, I'm preaching to the converted already. But it's funny how even with many of my students, they don't realize the importance of that physicality of learning, that they think that they just have to buy gumroads and take mentorships and join these different Discord channels and follow these blogs and buy these books and watch these YouTube videos and think that they're going to get better at art. But art's a physical activity. To quote Chris Oatley years ago, again, because I repeat myself a lot, as you may have noticed, if you subscribe to a fitness magazine and read an entire fitness magazine every day for a year, but you don't go to the gym, will you be in better shape at the end of the year? The answer is an obvious no. Of course not. You have to get up. You have to pick up the weights. You have to do the movements. You have to feel those muscles. What do I do every day? I do what a trainer would do. I set my timer. I have a little Pomodoro timer next to me. I have a few of them actually. And I do little 3-minute exercises. I grab pictures off of Pinterest and I do quick sketches, 3-minute sketches, 5-minute sketches, 10-minute sketches, 20-minute sketches. This is my daily routine. By the time I sit down to teach my morning class, I've already spent an hour and a half drawing, and my morning class is at 9, and I go to the gym at 6 o'clock in the morning. By the time noon's hit, I've already got several hours of productivity. But the reason I'm doing it is not because I'm trying to create a masterpiece. It's because I'm trying to physically connect myself with great imagery and learn from it, study the things, and physically practice the things that I find beautiful. I can stare at it all I want, but it's not until I attempt to draw it that I actually truly learn it. So, if we can have a takeaway from today, from this random ramble, this painter's hollow today, my first of 2026, it is to remember that you learn with your hands, not just your mind. And you have to respect the muscles of the hand. Remember that your hand is your instrument, and that you have to train it, and you have to respect it, and you need to take care of it. You need to teach it, not just the brain. In fact, You have my word that if you buy one art book, one investment, just one, and you spend an entire year practicing that one book, you will be 20 times the artist in 365 days than you would if you buy 50 art books, but don't practice them. You have my word. One can change your life if you actually apply it. As Anthony Jones said once when he was asked the question, what is the quality of some of the greatest students in your course that take your mentorship? He said, oh, that's easy. The greatest artists in my mentorship are the ones that actually do the homework. They actually do what they're instructed. So many artists listen and nod their heads and give you a hearty, warm thank you at the end of that 5-hour lecture. But only a percentage of them actually go home and put all of that to practice, that apply all of those lessons. If you want an assignment, I'll give you one right now. As of today, 5 days a week, every morning, before you sit down to do any drawing, compile 5 to 10 images, black and white or color, whatever you prefer. Get yourself a cheap Pomodoro timer, or you can use your watch or your phone. You can always get a timer on your phone as well. I like to use external Pomodoro timers. Just feels more official when you do that. And you set the timer for 3, then 5, then 10 minutes. And if you want to indulge, do a 20-minute drawing. You have my word that by the time you get to doing those 20-minute studies, 20 minutes is going to feel like 10 hours. You're going to become so efficient and so loosened up and so sharp in the mind and hand that you'll be able to pull things off in minutes. It's the best way to practice, and I do this on a daily basis. That's my warm-up. That's my physical exercise. Do it. You'll enjoy it. But if you want to make sure that it's something that you enjoy doing, make sure that whatever images you grab off of Pinterest or Google or ArtStation or wherever you get your stuff, make sure it's stuff you like. Because if you draw and study the things you like, that'll more quickly apply itself to your own artwork. And you'll be able to replicate and steal those beautiful ingredients from your inspirations and apply them in your own work. I do this all the time. This is how I grow. This is how I evolve. Okay? So hopefully one of two things have happened. Either A, you're totally not paying attention to me right now because you're locked into your own art. Hopefully that happened. Hopefully you have no idea what I painted, so glance over at the screen and go, wow, Adam, look what you did. That's so pretty. And I'll say thank you for that. And, or you're fast asleep because I put you to sleep with my very relaxed video, my relaxed voice. Either of those I consider a great compliment. Okay. With that said, I love you all with all my heart, and